Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Aisha N, a dentist with masters in oral medicine and radiology. Today I am here. I welcome you all to the presentation, which is orofacial pain differential diagnosis in general dental practice. I have a good diagnostic skills, but at the end of the day, I am a dentist practicing at Dr. SS Dental Care. So, what are we going to discuss today? 90% of the patients who come to us, who report to us, usually have an odontogenic pain. And they either have a periapical abscess or a periodontal abscess, which get landed up in an RCT or a scaling and root cleaning procedures. But we do have about 10% of the patients who come to us even after finishing all the treatment that they do have pain. And we clinicians think that it can be a psychological problem or the patient always reports to us with pain. Moving on, the pain patients who usually come to us require a very strong motivation for us to reach to us for seeking a dental care. It's usually because some of the ENT specialists or the neurologists refer to them to have a second opinion from us. It's actually a clinical nightmare to diagnose the atypical orofacial pain because we in our syllabus, that's in undergraduation, would have skipped a 10-mark question because orofacial pain would have not had a 10-mark question on that. And it's also been said by William Osler that what we don't know, we can't diagnose. So today I'm here to present the rationale behind discussing this topic or choosing the presentation on this is because usually the patients who have pain either have anxiety problems, stress, and they want to get out of anything to get away with this pain. So I'm here to present that one person or one patient who comes with the symptoms of this pain. So exactly the orofacial pain disorders, it's highly prevalent and the debilitating conditions which involves the head, face and the neck. It's a challenge to the clinician because usually mouth is the oral cavity. It's an stomatognatic system which contains teeth, which has periodontal ligament, teeth, nerves, vessels, muscles, etc. And the pain can be from any of these sources. Recently in our GDP group, we had a case that was a patient was diagnosed, had a problem of pain on swallowing, chewing, etc. And it was diagnosed by Dr. Nair as that was Rego-Hamaloid syndrome. So hats off to his skills of diagnosing, and the patient would have been really happy because the patient would have told he's literally fine after the surgical procedure. So let's simplify what is already very simple. Before I actually start going into the orofacial pain, let me give a little brief on what exactly the pain is. Pain in Greek word poin is penalty, and in Latin word it is punishment from God. That is poina. It is definitely a punishment from God because the patient with pain will not be able to sleep in the night. So going on to a little of history. Homer described that the pain can be because the arrows are being shot from the god. Hippocrates believe that it can be because of any imbalance in the fundus tissue, the oral fluid, the fluid in the body. Plato believed that it can be just an emotional experience of pain. But then, in the recent years, it is being diagnosed that it can be specialization of any noxious stimuli that would lead to pain. There are a number of definitions which is being given for pain that is given by ISP, Bell, Monham's, Dorland's Medical Dictionary, etc. But the most accepted one would be the International Association for the Study of Pain, that is WHO, which describes pain as an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage or described in terms of such damage. There are few sensory receptors which have been there to transmit the pain. There are exteroceptors which actually transmit the pain from external environment, which goes on at the conscious level. It can be pain, warmth, pressure, etc. Proprioceptors or the interoceptors, which is below the conscious level. It can be usually stimulated as position or the movement. So going on to different types of pain, They can be symptomatic types of pain, which is based on the onset and duration, either acute or chronic. Acute can be sharp or force-breaking pain, which is usually a very short period of time, and it is because of stimulation of the A delta fibers. And chronic pain, which is a burning, aching pain, which is for a longer period of time and being carried by the unmyelinated C fibers. So this are the symptoms, usually the types of symptoms of pain what is being present. And there are other few types of pain, which is usually like the stimulation of the A delta fibers, lancinating or shooting pain, that is mostly acute pulpitis, trigeminal neuralgia, or herpes zoster. Then we have stimulation of C fibers, that is throbbing pain, dilating, or the gnawing pain, which can be because of the periodontal abscess, periapical abscess, or usually or Ludwig's angina. So there are other classification for the pain which we might have not have it in our syllabus in our during our undergraduation. Those are usually used by the oral diagnosticians. That is, we have somatic pain and the visible pain. Somatic usually is because from the skin or the muscles. Visible pain can be from the internal organs. So somatic pain again has two types, that is superficial and the deep pain. Superficial I had already discussed, that is from the exteroceptors. And deep pain, it can be from the interoceptors or the proprioceptors. Pain is also being classified as fast and slow. Fast is it's being felt within within 0.1 second, and slow pain it can be taking over a 1 minute or over a second or minutes. But still, this remains a relevance is depends on the matter of debate of what exactly this can be. Now moving on to the orofacial pain. With this in background, I would go for the orofacial pain to detail on discussion. So orofacial pain, this is the specialty of dentistry that encompasses the diagnosis, the management and the treatment part of this pain disorders, which usually has jaw pain from the jaw, mouth, face and the associated regions. So the three basic steps or the three important things which we would want to diagnose for any of the orofacial pain diagnosis would be a history, wherein we take a complete and accurate history of the pain, or we ask the patient to complete his opening statement when he comes to us for the complaint. A good clinical examination, which would have an examination of the face or the associated organs, knowledge of what thorough knowledge, that is exactly what are the causes the patient would give us, and like how the orofacial pain would be described. So what, where, why, and how do we go about clinically diagnosing or evaluating these cases? First of all, a good chief complaint of the patient with a proper history of presenting illness, past medical and dental history, and also to a certain extent a psychological assessment. Pain assessment, we would go with there was an acronym which has been given by the Oxford Medical Education for assessment of pain, like Socrates, where exactly the site is being present of the pain, the onset, how exactly is the onset, what can be the character of the pain, or like how the patient feels. Radiation, does the pain go anywhere else? Associated symptoms, like if it's having any taste disturbances, salivary flow is increased or decreased, bruxism, time that how long the pain is being present, exacerbating or the relieving symptoms, and like what exactly the pain would be, make it better or worse, and then obtaining an initial pain score. So to obtain an initial pain score, we would go for assessing the pain, how exactly we can assess the pain on the numerical scales. So for this, we have three different measures, that is self-reported measures, behavioral measures, or physiologic measures, which would help in assessing the pain. So moving on to self-reported, we have different type of scales. That is, for the kids, we can use the Van Becker faces scale. We have different faces. So which is rating from 0 to 10. 0 is when the patient is not having a happy face, and 10 is extreme with a crying face. And then we have the Occult scale that has been again rated from 0 to 10, which is having both the visual faces and the numeric skill. So we can ask the kids to even rate depending on how the face is being looking, depending on the pain. Then we have the pocket chip scale, wherein we ask the patients, the kids, to basically pick up the chips. Like 1 is the initial pain or minimal pain, and 4 is a maximum pain. And what we usually use in our dental practices for the pain to elicit, we have the visual analog scale, that is again from 0 to 10. 0 is no pain, and 10 is the maximum extreme worst pain. So then we have behavioral measures and physiological, which I'm not going to get in detail of this because it's having a facial expression, verbalization or vocalization. Then again, physiologic, which would be vasoconstriction, oxygen saturation, which I'm not going to discuss in detail. So we can assess the pain in adults. So how about in infants, toddlers, or the adolescents? Let's go on discussing that. So when the pain assessment in infants, they cannot communicate to us. They have behavioral or physiological parameters. Yes, we can use it, but there are few facial expressions like brows, which are like there, which is being the brow, which is being bordered, the forehead, which is being there, the bulges between the brows, the vertical furrows which are being present, the eyes are tightly closed, cheeks are raised, nose broadened or bulging, the nasolabial fold would be deepened and the mouth would be squarish. Then we have pain assessment in toddlers or preschoolers. Usually, this preschoolers they report the pain as hurt, boo boo, or ouch. We will be able to locate the pain, but not the intensity and the quality. So, what we can use the tools is the poker chip scale, the faces scale, or the visual analog scale. Pain assessment in school age children or adolescents. So this we can basically have a more abstract manner so that we can elicit the intensity and the quality of the pain. We can ask direct questions to the patient. And tools what we can use is yes, poker chip scale, Ocker scale, visual log scale, and also a pain questionnaire to elicit the pain. And then we go for a proper medical history. If any like current or the pre-existing relevant physical disease if it's present, any previous treatments or surgeries, medications, allergies, alcohol, or any substance abuse that the patient is having, then yes, the dental history, which is having a previous treatments, patient's attitude towards the treatment, if there was any history of trauma to the head and neck or any iatrogenic factors or any parafunctional history like which is either a diurnal or a nocturnal history. Then we go on examining the patient, which would start from the general examination of the patient with inspection of head and neck to check for the asymmetry or any posture disturbances, examination of the associated muscles, TMJ, cervical spine, salivary gland assessment. Then we also do the cranial nerve examination or the ENT, that's ear, nose, and throat examination as part of the extraoral examination. Then we move on with the intraoral evaluation, wherein we involve the heart and soft tissue examination. If there are any carious lesions which are present, wasting diseases, tooth mobility or trauma, and also check the gingival and the periodontal status or any pathologic alterations of the soft tissues. Moving on to the diagnostic test, a brief note on how exactly we go about diagnosing. Imaging, we can do a simple, like for any periapical arc, a simple RBG or IOPA would serve the purpose. Then going on to if we have to elicit any of the bony lesions or cysts, we go on with the OPG for diagnosing it on the initial basis. Then we have the ultrasonography for the salivary gland, which is usually for the salivary calculi, which would give a hyperechoic area on the salivary flow. Then we have the TMJ examination, wherein we can see if there's any disturbances in the condyle, if there's any condyle which is flattened, or if any articular disc spaces which is reduced, that would be better on the TMJ view. Then we have the SSC's computer tomography that is helpful in diagnosing any bony abnormalities, ankylosis of fractures. Then MRI, that would like a magnetic resonance imaging, which would help in disc positioning, that's open or closed positions. Then in any of the inflammatory conditions, hematoma, or yes, in vascular compression of the trigeminal nerve. Moving on to the laboratory test, basic complete blood count to elicit if there's any anemia. Then ferritin or the B12 folate level, that is usually in the burning mouth syndrome. Zinc levels, again, usually in the burning mouth syndromes to see if any taste or smell disturbances. Hypothyroidism, if there's any causing of headache. Diabetes to overall overhealth, in particular the periodontal status. Antibody screening, that is ENAs, the extractable nuclear antigens, or the ANA antibodies for diagnosing the autoimmune disorders. Or ESR, a simple ESR CRP, which shows us the increased inflammatory conditions. Now there's another classification which is being given by the American Academy of the Orofacial Pain for the differential diagnosis of orofacial pain. We have different causes for this, like intracranial disorders, pain disorders, which is neoplasms, aneurysms, hematoma, primary headache or the neurovascular ones, which is migraine, cluster headache, etc. Neurogenic pain disorders like trigeminal neuralgia, paroxysmal neuralgia, or symptomatic pain maintained. Any of the intraoral pain disorders, like from the dental pulp, periodontium, mucogingival tissues, or the tongue. Temporomandibular disorders like the masticatory muscle, the temporomandibular joint, or any of the associated structures. Associated structures, again, it could be ears, eyes, nose, paranasal sinuses, throat, lymph, salivary glands, or the neck. So with all this background, we go on to this discussing about the specific differential diagnosis of the orofacial pain, like how exactly we're going to differentiate the orofacial pain. I'm going to discuss this depending on this following headaches, that is odontogenic pain, osseous or the periosteal pain, orofacial, that's oral soft tissue pain, TMJ pain, myalgias, neuropathic pain, or the vascular pain. So starting on with the odontogenic pain, it might start from a basic dental caries wherein we can localize it to. Usually there will be no pain, but if it's pain present, there will be moderate or a dull aching pain, wherein it would just be, if it required, be taken intraoral X-ray, and the management would be removal of the caries and restoration. Then we have the irreversible pulpitis. It is little difficult to localize the pain, but yes, the pain would be a little sharp, throbbing, or moderate type, which should aggravate on cold, hot, sweet foods, lying, supine, or caries. Tender to percussion, there will be an on percussion. Apical intraoral X-ray can be taken, and management would be again an extraction or an endodontics. That's RCT. Then we have the periodontal disorders. Here we could localize the tooth. Pain would be of dull or the dull aching type or low intensity. Aggravating factors, yes, might be sometimes eating. Examination, mobile tooth, gingiva, that is erythematous, pocketing, discharge from the pocket. Then we can diagnose, investigations would be apical intraoral X-ray or OPG. Management would be scaling and the root planing. Pericoronitis usually in terms of partially erupted tooth, that is aggravating, that pain would be a little dull, aching or moderate severe type. Aggravating factors would be biting, lymphadenopathy or malaise. Examination, again, there would be tender salivary glands or the tender lymph nodes. OPG can be taken for the investigations. Management would be debridement, hot salt rinses, antibiotics, or even extraction of the upper wisdom tooth. Cracked tooth syndrome, it is little difficult to localize the tooth. Usually the pain would be sharp, sometimes dull or moderate type. Examination again would be little difficult unless we ask the patient to bite on a cotton roll, which would elicit the pain. Investigations, X-rays would not be that helpful. Yes, CBCT might sometimes help us out, or also we can use a methylene dye to elicit if there is any crack which is being present. Management would be RCT or extraction depending on the level of fracture which is being there. Maxillary sinusitis. There's a definition that is being given for the acute maxillary sinusitis by IASP. That's a constant burning pain with zygomatic or dental tenderness from inflammation of the maxillary sinus. Chronic cases, usually there will be no pain or mild discomfort will be seen, and this would be elicited on a Botto's view to see if there's any haziness which is being present in the maxillary sinus, with the history of the any treatment is being done in that particular quadrant. The diagnostic criteria, which I'm going to discuss, is there can be purulence in the nasal cavity. There could be simultaneous onset of headache and sinusitis. There would be halitosis, and the patient would elicit pain on bending. Pain over the antral area, which may radiate to the upper teeth or forehead. Headache usually disappears after treatment of the acute sinusitis. Then the osseous or the periosteal pain. This is usually the dry socket, that is local in the local tooth socket, that is post extraction, mostly about 4 to 5 days post extraction. There would be loss of clot and they would be bone exposed, which can also be having the halitosis. So irrigation would solve the problem. If not, we need to advise the antibiotics. Osteomyelitis. So it is defined by trypanosome as an inflammatory condition of the bone that begins as an infection involving the medullary cavity, which overall spreads to the Haversian systems and extends to periosteum of the affected area. So what would be the clinical findings? There would be a local pain, fever, swelling, purulent discharge, intraoral or the skin fistula, unhealed soft tissues, that is, there could also be a neuroplasia in the involved area. There could be even pathologic fracture or decrease in mouth opening, that is trismus. Diagnosis would be, we could see a painful sequestra or a separative areas which does not respond to any of the conservative treatment. Either we do a debridement or a conservative treatment, it will not solve the problem. Differential diagnosis, again, it could be a Paget's disease, that is a fibro-osseous lesion, wherein the normal soft tissue would be, get replaced by the hard bone tissue, hypercementosis, or a fibrous dysplasia. Oral soft tissues. So now here we need to elicit or check how exactly we can see. If there is any red lesion or a burning sensation, it would give a sign of lichen planus. Oral soft tissues like a small ulceration or a traumatic ulcer, which can be because of ill-fitting denture or a sharp cusp. Then we need to exclude if there's any anemic stomatitis. And if all these causes have been ruled out, we can think of a burning mouth syndrome. Temporomandibular joint pain. This would involve in together. That's either we have the masticatory muscles or the temporomandibular joint may be involved in this. It usually involves the muscular pain, TMJ disc, that's interference disorders, TMJ degenerative joint disorders. So features, usually there can be a history of trauma. It's mostly prevalent in females, and the pain they can give a history of intermittent pain. And sometimes, yes, the tension type of headaches can also be mistaken for the TMD. There would be a definite relationship sometimes that TMD pain is also having an habit of like a direct relationship with clenching habit or the bruxism. Diagnosis, again, the pain from the TMG, that is, it could be a dull, poorly radiated, poorly localized, and may radiated pain, and it could have a trismus. Examination, that is, clicking would be present, limited jaw opening trismus. There would be masticatory muscles which are tender, and sometimes even we can see that the joint is swollen. That would give the diagnosis of an arthritis. This would be the different ways of examining the TMJ, that is extra-oral examination, wherein we evaluate the TMJ examination, then check for the muscle palpation, if there's any tenderness of the muscle, and also check the mouth opening to see if there's any trismus that would be ruled out. Then we have the muscle pain, that's the myalgias. Then that is myofascial pain dysfunction. Here, there would be a localized tender area and a trigger point. On the trigger point, we could see a taut band of the skeletal muscle or the masticatory muscle. And there would be a referred pain, that's the zone of reference when the pain would get referred. In this, it actually can be an acute injury, or it is mostly by overuse or a chronic microtrauma. There is definitely a stress, the clenching or the grinding habits with a spasm of the muscles of mastication. Four cardinal signs which is being given by Laskin that would be definitely present in MPDS. That is unilateral pain, a muscle tenderness, a clicking or a popping noise of the TMJ, and a limitation of the jaw function. Deviation of the mandible when we ask a patient to open the mouth. So coming to a few of the diagnostic criteria, what exactly we can elicit for this type of pain. There would be a regional dull aching pain, which is at rest. Then we have the provocation of the trigger. There's a trigger point which gets provocated. Then greater about almost in about 50% of the patients. If we use a vapor coolant spray or a local anesthetic injection into the trigger point, that would solve the problem. And also the patient pain not aggravated when there's a functioning of the affected muscle. Coming to neuropathic pains or the neuralgias, that's the trigeminal neuralgia. This is being defined by the IASP as a sudden, usually a unilateral, severe, brief stabbing, recurrent pain in the distribution, or one of more branches of the trigeminal nerve. Here we could see that the afferent fibers, the abnormal afferent fibers in the dorsal ganglion, or would also be compression of the nerve in the trigeminal ganglion root. So that would cause one of the causes for the trigeminal neuralgia. The clinical features would be an intense shooting, stabbing kind of pain, which would last from few seconds and then completely gets disappear. It is usually unilateral in nature. The most important division that would be involved is the maxillary division. Trigger zone, either it could be a nasolabial fold or corner of the lip that would elicit the pain. Intraoral, sometimes intraoral, we have an intraoral trigger zone that would also confuse for a dental disorder. So there would be a unilateral pain, anatomical distribution of that affected area, slowly spreads to one or more extensive parts of the nerve. Sometimes, yes, there will be patients which report with a bilateral pain at not, but it would definitely not be at the same time. There's diagnostic criteria which is being given by the International Headache Society for this. There can be paroxysmal pain from a fraction of a second to 2 minutes, and we should have either of the following criteria. That is, pain has to have at least one of the following characteristics. That is, intense, sharp, intense, sharp, or the stabbing pain, which is precipitated by trigger areas or by trigger factors. Attacks which is stereotyped with the individual patient, and there will be no clinically evaluated neurologic deficit or no another attributed another disease. Differential diagnosis we can give here is a cluster headache. Cluster headache, yes, it's a long-lasting pain which we can differentiate on. It's like trigeminal will just a short pain for a short period of time. Glossopharyngeal neuralgia, that is usually the pain is being present in the back of the ear, and there would be increase on swallowing, talking, or chewing. Migraine, yes, it would have headache, but here it would be either have following characteristics like a phonophobia or a photophobia. Post-herpetic neuralgia, this patient would have had a history of herpes zoster that would have got aggravated because of any of the surgical procedure or any of trauma. Giant cell arthritis, it is when you have the pain for a long-lasting pain, but it is accompanied with jaw claudication. Glossopharyngeal neuralgia. It's similar to trigeminal neuralgia, but here the glossopharyngeal nerve is usually affected, and the pain would be either in the, it is different, usually the ninth nerve neuralgia, but the pain would be definitely on the ear, tonsil, base of the tongue, the side would be different. Sharp, lancinating, or extremely intense pain, which is of short duration. Either talking, chewing, swallowing, etc., or even touching the instrument in a blunt instrument tonsil would aggravate the pain. The diagnostic criteria would be unilateral pain, that is involving the glossopharyngeal nerve, with the following criteria. That is, the pain would last from few seconds to 2 minutes at least, which is severe in intensity. It's like an electric shock-like pain with a shooting, stabbing, or a sharp and precipitated by swallowing, coughing, talking, or yawning. And it should also have the criteria not accounted by anywhere else. That's the ICOP, that's the International Classification of Orofacial Pain, or ICH, that's International Classification of Head and Neck Disorders, Headache Disorders. So then differential diagnosis we can think of as a trigeminal neuralgia, a masticatory pain like an MPDS. But then we should have a Laskin scope differential criteria for this. Then post-herpetic neuralgia, usually a pain of the herpes zoster, resolves within months. But if it persists longer, then it's in post-herpetic neuralgia. But some authors also say that more than a pain persistent for more than 3 to 6 months also can be considered as a post-herpetic neuralgia. Major risk factor would be increasing age, but yes, there are few cases wherein 30 years of age, younger than 30 years also, they elicit the pain. Here, both the central and the peripheral mechanisms are being involved. The clinical presentation would be an intractable chronic or a burning pain, which would be usually superficial, and it would be affected by an acute attack. Pain would be accompanied with sensory symptoms, The symptoms would be exacerbated symptoms, and spontaneous reduction may occur. Pain would either be a moderate in nature, but intractably, usually what is being present, it's constant, so it renders a patient to be intolerable. The diagnostic criteria would be it would involve the branches of the trigeminal nerve, or it will be persisting or recurring for over 3 months. And herpes zoster may involve same trigeminal nerve or the branches of the trigeminal nerve. Pain developed in the temporal region, the temporal relation to the acute herpes zoster infection. Again, it has to be not accounted within of the diagnosis of ICOP or ICHD. Post-traumatic neuropathic pain. The trigeminal neuralgia, the trigeminal injuries, which is either due to any of the surgical procedures or the trauma. Here, either an injury which could give a numbness of pain, which could be either spontaneous or triggered by a stimulus. Pain would be of usually a burning quality, and probably only the central system would be involved in this. And pain may be persistent or associated with a stimulus. The diagnostic criteria here would be neuroanatomically the pain would be present, but with distribution of one or more branches of the trigeminal nerve persisting for over 3 months with the following characteristics, that is the C and D. Both of the following will be present, that is history of mechanical trauma, mechanical, thermal, or the radiation or the chemical injury to the peripheral trigeminal nerve. Diagnostic information would be again with the lesion of the trigeminal nerve explaining the pain. The onset has to be within 6 months of the injury. The associated somatosensory system with the neuroanatomically plausible distribution, again not accounted in the ICOP or ICHD. Coming to atypical odontologia, that is phantom tooth pain. This would have characteristics or the origin itself from psychological or a neuropathic origin. Chronic facial pain that is not characteristic clinical feature, which is not thoroughly investigated or do not fall into any of other diagnostic criteria. So, atypical odontologia has also been described by Mirsky as the throbbing pain in the tooth, but without any major pathology of the tooth. The clinical manifestations would be a constant dull aching pain, which would usually be in 50% in women, and definitely in fourth or fifth decade of life. There would be no trigger zones, and lancinating pain would be very rare, and patient usually correlates it that the patient would have a previous dental treatment. But and then multiple previous consultations for the pain of the patient would have gone for previous consultation without much relief, and pain one area or it might migrate to other areas. Burning mouth syndrome, oral burning, that is, there would be no detectable cause as such. There would be no anatomical pathways or a mucosal lesion or a neurological symptoms. So how we define this is burning, that's oral burning, would be present, which is recurring daily for more than 2 hours per day, that is more than 3 months without any evident causative lesion, clinical examination, or investigation. Usually, there would be a number of causes for the burning mouth syndrome that would range either from a simple traumatic, iatrogenic, or metabolic, or even degenerative disease. Women would definitely experience 7 times more than men. 10 to 15% of the post-menopausal women, that is usually about 3 to 12 years post-menopause, can be the cause. Tongue is usually the most common area affected, followed by lip and palate. The one finding which patient would elicit is there would be no findings in the, there will be no, definitely no findings in the tongue, but sometimes yes, there can be geographic tongue involved in this case. Clinical manifestations, yes, there is definitely burning, intermittent or it could be continuous burning pain. Eating or drinking relieves the pain. After the patient would be apprehensive or anxious. Signs and symptoms of depression would also be present. Diagnostic criteria, there will be oral pain fulfilling the other two criteria. Recurring, definitely, as I told, it would be, have to be more than 2 hours and for more than 3 months. The other following characteristics would be burning quality of the pain, felt superficially in the oral mucosa, And oral mucosa definitely appears normal, but there would be a local or symptomatic cause involved with it. It has to be excluded out. So again, it has to be not accounted by any of ICOP or ICG diagnosis. There are different types of burning mouth syndrome. That would be type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 would be present every day. The burning would be present every day, but not when the patient is awakened. As the day goes, it would be the burning would be getting more worse, and the intensity was high, so like more almost 35% of the frequency. Type 2 present every day right from the awakening of the patient, that would be around almost 55%. And type 3 present only a few days, or it would be in unusual location, like usually in neck, that would be almost about 10% of the frequency. Then we have vascular pain, that is temporal arthritis or a giant cell arthritis. Here, it is like a vasculitis. It's a cell-mediated immune damage to the blood vessel that is usually in the head and neck region. So here, the age would be under the age of 50 years, and it's also been elicited that females are almost 3 times more likely involved than men. And temporal artery is the one which is most commonly affected. Then we have the characteristics like unilateral or bilateral headache, that is of aching or throbbing quality, which would be intense and it is continuous. There would be scalp tenderness, there would be visual changes or the neurological changes. And the criterion for the IHS would be any new persistent headache in the temporal region with either swollen or tender scalp artery. The classic symptoms would be a unilateral headache or a polymyalgia rheumatica, and the pathognomic of the temporal arthritis would be pain in the temporalis and the masseter muscle on shoulder. Then we have cluster headache. Here it is severe, strictly a unilateral facial pain or orofacial pain without an headache, which should last from as simple as 15 minutes to 180 minutes, from once every day to at least 8 times, episodes of 8 times a day. And the patient would tell that this stiffening is punching of demon punching on my eye. The pain would be ipsilateral conjunctival injection. There would be erythema of the eye. That's because of the conjunctival vessels are being involved. Lacrimation, nasal congestion or rhinorrhea, forehead and facial sweating, miosis, ptosis, or eyelid edema with or without restlessness or agitation. Clinical symptoms, again, 80% will be mostly men. Attacks would be sudden unilateral stabbing, causing the patient to pace, cry, or even strike the object. And as I told, it would be, patient would describe it as a hot metal rod in and around the eye. Usually involves the first division, ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve, begin with an aura and become excruciating within few minutes. The criterion would be at least 5 attacks of the pain with the following characteristics criteria, that is B and B to D. That is severe, very severe unilateral pain or orofacial pain, again, which is lasting from 15 minutes to 180 seconds when not treated. Either of the following, at least one of the following symptoms, that is ipsilateral to the pain, conjunctival injection or lacrimation, nasal congestion or rhinorrhea, eyelid edema, forehead and facial sweating, miosis or ptosis. A sense of restlessness or agitation occurring from about 1 to almost 8 per day, not accounted for any of the ICOP or ICHT diagnosis. Differential diagnosis would be a temporal arthritis, but this we should have a jaw claudication here. A typical trigeminal neuralgia, that is the trigeminal neuralgia, the trigger points would be different in atypical trigeminal neuralgia. Migraine. It is typically presents as an episodic headache that interferes with normal daily activities. The clinical features would be of 2 different types of headaches. Here it would be a migraine with aura, which is a common migraine, or common migraine without an aura, that is a classic migraine. The classic characteristics would be headache attacks that is lasting for about 4 to 72 hours, unilateral location, pulsation sensation would be there, moderate or severe pain intensity, aggravated by routine physical activities, accompanied by nausea or even vomiting, sensitivity to light and also on sound. So diagnostic criteria which is being given by IHS is 5 headache attacks that is lasted from 4 to 72 hours untreated or unsuccessfully treated with the following characteristics, that is unilateral location, moderate to severe pain intensity, pulsating quality of the pain, aggravating that is on that's caused by avoidance of any routine physical activities like walking or climbing stairs. In addition, the patient should also have characteristics like nausea and or vomiting, and definitely photophobia and phonophobia. Coming to few of the referred causes of pain, there would be also definitely the pain would be get referred from different areas. That is, neck. If the pain is from the neck origin, there would be definitely a cervical spondylosis. Pain referred to the face. Then the patient who have angina, the heart diseases, patient sometimes gets referred to the mandible. Lungs, if there is any lung cancer, the orofacial pain may mimic a trigeminal dysfunction. Esophagus, there will be pain plus excess of salivation, siluria. Steroid process, there would be Eagle's syndrome, there would be pain in the neck. Eyes, there would be disorders of refraction or retrobulbar neuritis. That is multiple sclerosis. Again, the pain might radiate to the orbit, maxilla, or the frontal regions. Ears, the pain would have the headache or the pain in the TMJ region. Carcinoma of the pharynx with the orofacial pain. So with this, I would present here a few misdiagnosed cases. But then again, after the misdiagnosis, how it is being completely diagnosed and how the treatment is being elicited. So this was a case I was talking about, which was with Dr. Nair. This patient was having pain from over a year, and it was misdiagnosed as glossopharyngeal and the myofascial neuralgia. So, but on the detailed clinical examination and a CBCT, it was found that there was a elongated pterygoid hamulus. So it was conservatively treated, conservatively surgical excision was done, and the patient was relieved with the pain. So a misdiagnosis has to be managed with a proper diagnosis and a proper history. Then we have another case, that is atypical odontologia, which was misdiagnosed as odontogenic pain. So here the patient had presented with pain, and there was a pain which was not, which was considered to be as an odontogenic pain, and it was treated accordingly. And then later on, if the pain, when the pain did not come down, the patient was started on tricyclic antidepressants, and then it was ruled out to be a atypical facial pain. So neuropathic pain here was diagnosed as to be an odontogenic pain. Then we have the trigeminal neuralgia, which was mimicking an odontogenic pain, wherein the patient had elicited that the patient had pain on the distribution, like on the trigeminal facial pain, with paroxysmal attack, which is present. So patient was depending as considering as an odontogenic pain, was treated with endodontic treatments. And when the pain did not come down, the neuropathic pain, the patient was given carbamazepine. So then the symptoms would come down. So it was misdiagnosed as odontogenic pain. Then we had a misdiagnosis of fibrosarcoma of the mandible, making it to be a temporomandibular pain. So this a female, that's 14-year-old female, was presented with the signs and symptoms which is similar to TMD. That is, usually this pains, usually the TMDs would be very common in about under the age of 20 years. So later on, there was limited jaw movement, facial asymmetry, etc. But later on, when the pain did not come down, she was referred to a neurologist, wherein they came up with an conservative treatment. There was surgical treatment with chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and excluding it to be a fibrosarcoma, which is like malignant lesion gets misdiagnosed sometimes with TMD. Then we had a vascular pain, like how a vascular pain was misdiagnosed as a TMD pain. So this patient, she reported with odontogenic pain to a dental clinic, wherein she was diagnosed, given analgesics for the pain to come down. When the pain did not come down, she was referred. She was given. She was done with she was done. A CT scan was done. OPG was done, and there were no causes which was seen. So then the patient was advised to get a complete blood count done, wherein there was increase in ESR levels, and then they could see that okay, there was they referred to the pain clinic where it was diagnosed, like depending on the TMD, the function, the mouth opening, etc., wherein it was diagnosed with the osteoarthritis. But still, the patient did not come on with the pain, so they again referred back to the pain clinic, wherein they diagnosed it with the range of movements with the accurate history. The patient told that the patient at least had long-lasting pain for about 2 to 3 episodes of pain. She also had the pain which was increased during swallowing. The TMG, the mouth opening was reduced. Then it was diagnosed as giant cell arthritis. Though it was on the histopathology, there were no multinucleated giant cells, but they were inflammatory cells and macrophages. So it was in initial stages of giant cell arthritis. With this, I would present, because I could conclude the misdiagnosis. I'm going to discuss few cases which I had which we had diagnosed in my post graduation days. So there was a patient, a 25-year-old girl, who had presented to us. She had a swelling, which was a swelling, extraordinary swelling, which was present from about 2 years. And from past 3 years, the patient had mild pain, and the patient had short stature. She had not attained her puberty. So when she had come to our college, we did a thorough examination, both extraorally and intraorally, and we could see that the patient had proptosis, but there was no visual disturbances. And the patient, it was a heart swelling. It was extending up to the eye, up to the area of the infraorbital region, and it also had a swelling on the palatal region. And there was vestibular. The vestibular was obliterated. So then we went ahead with doing CT. CT was done wherein we could see the maxillary sinusitis was obliterated. We gave a diagnosis of differential. We gave a diagnosis of fibro-osseous lesion. So after we took a CT, there was obliteration of complete the maxillary sinus. So this was referred to the oral surgeons. They took away with the Weber-Ferguson's incision, excised the particular lesion, and then it was sent to the oral pathology, wherein on the H&E we could see the different cells. We could see the tumor cells, and further to confirmation, we had done immunohistochemistry, wherein we could see that it was positive for S100, which was giving us a sign of ancient schwannoma on the as per the histopathology. And the patient is still completely being followed up. She is still in contact with me. She every 2 months she gives me a call and she tells she's absolutely fine. So I'm still in contact with the patient. Then I had another case of malignant melanoma of the palate. So this was a 49-year-old male patient. He was having a history of a small ulcer which was being present on the palatal region, but from past 3 months the ulcer had increased in size. The patient also gave us a history of smoking, alcohol consumption. So on examination, we could see an we could see an endophytic ulcer, which was which was present right from on the palate, from the this nasal aspect of the upper molar. It was extending deep downwards. There was bleeding on slight provocation. There was also the melanin pigmentation on the gingiva, which was present. So after this, we could give a differential diagnosis because it was giving more of an melanin. So we could give a differential diagnosis of malignant melanoma as a provisional, and we could give it as a squamous cell carcinoma as a differential diagnosis. And then on the CT, we could see there was an obliteration, the bone obliteration was seen on the buccal aspect. Then oral surgeons did an incisional biopsy, which was sent to oral pathology. First one, it was confirmed on H&E staining that it was having tumor cells, but on H&D staining, immunohistochemistry, it was elicited that HMB45 was present, which was an indicator of the malignant melanoma cells. So with this, I finally conclude my presentation with the important message to all the doctors that it is easy to diagnose the 90% of the patients who come with the odontogenic facial pain. But the problem starts with the 10% of the patients who get a history of atypical orofacial pain. And yes, it is a clinical nightmare, a challenge to the patient, because we have to differentially diagnose these patients whether it has to be an odontogenic in origin, a vascular origin, or a neurogenic origin. Solving this puzzle of differentiating into these categories would only be right when we get our basics right, because we cannot get this treatment only with the palliative treatment. It has to be more specific depending on the signs and symptoms of patients elicits to us, and that we don't land a patient into chronicity. So we have to basically rightly diagnose the disease at a very early stage. So the patient does not go in ended up with a misdiagnosis or a wrongly diagnosed and treated for all the irrelevant things, and then the patient going into chronicity. So early diagnosis, early treatment planning, and early treatment is successful in nature has to, so that it doesn't go into a long-term issues. So we long-term issues, and we hopefully as clinicians go for a more referral-based practice, doing referral-based practice which is not doctor-based or individual doctor-based. Like we go in for a group of individuals wherein we discuss the cases, come to a diagnosis, which is more practiced in a Western world than us. We here treat when a patient comes to us, treat the cause, diagnose the disease, treat the cause individually without having a secondary opinion. We rather go in for a discussion on different platforms or different forums. For the patient, about 10% of the patients who come to us with the symptoms, we come to we discuss on the symptoms, the signs and symptoms of the patients, come to a good conclusion, a good treatment planning, or rather a good differential diagnosis to be specific, so that accordingly the treatment, the patient gets treated, either treating or neurosurgeon treating it, a neurologist treating it, a maxillofacial surgeon treating it, or a TMD specialist treating it, or simple prosthodontic treating the case. So these are my references.
Thank you, Dr. Aisha.
I thank the GDP platform for giving me the opportunity to do my presentation here for the topic which was of my specialty. I thank Gausia ma'am, Nair sir, Mubarak sir, Nadeem sir, Asim sir, who gave me the opportunity to do my presentation here. My presentation would be incomplete if I don't thank my friend Dr. Shahul and Dr. Asfa, my sister, who helped me throughout my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha. This, I think, was a very great talk. I think it's closest to all of us, because I think most of the patients turn up to the dentist complaining of pain. And pain is subjective, and different people's perception of pain is quite different. I think you explained beautifully the pain scales and the different various I would say nomenclatures used across the world with regards to how you classify pain, or how you could elicit from the patients. But I like the way you presented it, and I'm happy that we got to see some of your wonderful rare cases as well. I'm extremely pleased with that. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen now, and I'm going to bring in the panel members so we could go in with the question and answers. Now we've got Dr. Amirunisa, who doesn't need any introduction, and she is one of our panel members for today. Dr. Nadeem will be taking the questions, putting the questions across. I'm going to mute myself and ask. Dr. Amirunisa, could you please turn on your video if you don't mind?
I'm not able to turn on my video. I don't know why. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That is wonderful. So I'm going to keep myself out of this and I'm going to let the experts take on the questions. Dr. Nadeem, it's all yours. I'm going to mute.
Yeah, right, fine. Thank you. Fantabulous presentation, Dr. Aisha. Kudos for that. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Amirunisa. Welcome aboard.
Walaikum assalam, Dr. Nadeem.
Yeah, hope all you people are, I think Sunday afternoon, lazy afternoon, I think all are active for today, for today's questions. And I think regarding the pain, I think one pain which we all missed out was sitting for 2 months in the house. That pain is which is missed out. And I think no one can treat better than us going back to our clinical practices. Right. I think the first question is from Dr. Nadeem. He asks, how much reliable pain scale from 0 to 10 on kids, and how you actually assess psychological status in pain contribution? I think Dr. Aisha, can you take this question? The pain scale from 0 to 10 on kids. First of all, I have a query with the same question. How reliable is the scale itself from 0 to 10? Does it vary from clinician to clinician? Because if I have to scale someone between 0 to 10, if you have to scale between 0 to 10, or Dr. Amirunisa has to scale between 0 to 10, will that scale vary from one clinician to other clinician?
So
The numbers.
the pain scale would actually not differ. It would have to be same, because we know what exactly at 0 the pain would be, how the pain would be on 10. So we could ask the patient of how to rate it. So depending on how the patient would rate the scale, the treatment has to be put on. I would not tell it to differ from the clinician. It has to be mostly, it has to be same for all the clinicians when we have to go for the treatment. And talking about the pain scale in children, so we usually use the Pocker chip scale or the Ocker scale. So with the kids who come to us, at least they tell us facial expression, because they have facial expressions, seeing that they could elicit the pain what they are going for. So I would just tell that depending on the facial expression, because psychologically we have different, like what I was telling about the oxygen saturation, the tachycardia, etc. So that would help in eliciting, like just to see. Apart from the facial expressions, we could use a physiological assessment only to see.
Dr. Amirunisa, something to add on this?
Actually, it is not the clinician who will be varying on the deciding the scale. It will be just on the patient how he will tell you. Like, no, every patient may differ. For one patient, if the pain is somewhere near the 6, the same pain could be somewhere in the 8 for the other patient. So it's dependent upon the clinician how he is going to take up that scale. And like how Aisha said, it's not only the scale. You see its expression and decide on diagnosis is more important, seeing the etiology and all.
So the bottom line, when you come to the pointing of the numbers in the scale, I would really say the numbers are irrelevant to clinicians actually.
Yeah.
Because if Dr. Aisha has to see a patient and she has to jot down number 8 on the scale, and that patient goes to another clinician and that person jots it at number 7. So you cannot diagnose the case based on the pain scale, right? Dr. Aisha, just correct me if I'm wrong. This is what my understanding goes. You're able to hear me? Am I clear? Am I audible?
Can you just repeat it?
Yeah, I'll just repeat. I was just saying the pain scale. This is my personal opinion. The opinions might vary because the pain scale varies from clinician to clinician. The reason why I said was if you have to gauge a patient based on the pain scale between 0 to 10, and you jot down as number 7 or number 5 or whatever relevant number you have given, and the patient goes to the other clinician, and the other clinician happened to see and which the patient elicits his symptoms and everything, and the clinician again jots it at number 8. So the scale, the numbers vary from clinician to clinician. You cannot treat the patient based on the point scale, right? That is what my question is. How reliable? That is the question being asked. How reliable?
But it's an additive. It's an additive measure.
Okay.
It would act like the visual analog scale would act like a more additive measure, because only depending on the pain scale we would not rate the treatment. We would definitely go for other things also, only on the pain scale. Pain scale, I would just tell that it's more in the cases like the patient was having the oral lesions, like any of lichen planus or burning sensation. I would definitely take more on the oral lesions, which is being present. Pain would definitely yes differ, but according to the additive scales, whatever we have.
Okay, but is it universally followed everywhere? The pain scale numbering, is it universally followed, or is just into academics for understanding the pain scale management?
I don't think it is universally followed. Pain, I would not think universally we follow unless and until it's oral, because we as oral diagnosticians, don't first of all give more of the Page's scale on the oral lesions, because when the patient comes to us with a lichen planus, so he will have burning sensation. So, or a patient who is having, myself had a patient who was having lupus erythematosus, the SLE which he was having. So I was during my treatment, I would ask the patient how she would refer the pain. So I would tell the lesions or whatever the pain scale I'm using, I would take it more on the oral lesions rather than just giving it for the dental pain. Dental pain, yes, it is usually necessary, but then along with the additive scales, whatever we have, physiologic, whatever we have.
Okay, Dr. Amirunisa, can the history vary on the pain scale management? Let me elaborate this. The day one, you see the patient and you get into the history and pain scale numbering and everything on the day one. And you call the same patient without doing any treatment on day two. Will the patient, the first day, the symptoms shown and the recordings taken by you, will that vary on the second day, or will it be the same? Because the patient would never give the same history what he has given on day one.
It would surely vary, you know, like the pain scale, like how Aisha is saying, we can't take it as a universally acceptable in all the cases, because every clinician and every human being, I think it is just a tendency of human being. You can't say that this one is like one pain type of pain in the one scale number one will be same to every patient.
Exactly.
So
basically, it just, as Dr. Aisha said, it's just an add-on, which you really cannot rely on this numbering.
Yes.
Right. Moving on to the next question, it's by Dr. Asim. He asks, do we evaluate the posture of patient and head position? Are they important for diagnosis for oral pain?
I didn't get you.
Yeah, I would repeat, do we evaluate the posture of patient and head position? Are they important for diagnosis for oral pain? So I would just put it in a more simpler words. I think posture of the patient and head position is forward head position of the patient when you're seeing him clinically, or his walk, his gait, his spine structure. So probably will that give any value to, to diagnose the oral pain?
As I think Aisha, Dr. Aisha, she had explained about maxillary sinusitis, like forward movement of the pain will increase the forward movement of the head will increase the pain. So I think the posture and the head position of the patient, we can diagnose whether it is due to the neck pain, like due to sometimes the posture of the patient's posture of a person may lead to some neck problems. So he may show it as a pain in head and neck region. So I think posture and head position are important for your diagnosis, I think. Like during history, taking your history of the patient.
Yeah.
It will be.
I think ma'am is right, sir. It does have an effect. The posture, yes, it does have an effect. Yes, I would agree with ma'am.
Yeah, I think just to add on, I think we dentists are more focused to set of 32. The patient, when the moment he comes on the dental chair, we are just more concerned, just open the mouth and see the 32 inside. I think the gait of the patient is very important. And before you start examining the oral cavity, I think you see the position of your head, whether the patient has got a forward head position. I think that would reveal much of the relevant condition if the patient comes with some pain, because forward head position might be one of the contributing factors for migraine, which you beautifully explained regarding the migraine, because more stress on the cervical vertebrae. I think that's one of the most important thing to look out clinically.
As we are taught, I think during our graduation period, examination starts when the patient enters your clinic. It's not on the chair. So it is from the moment the patient entering, how you examine the patient, the examination starts from that moment. I think.
Actually, we miss this, ma'am. Actually, whatever said and done, how experienced the clinician is, we tend to lose this point actually, and we just get focused on to the moment the patient sits, like, okay, open your mouth, and we start seeing and start focusing. I think we lack this point. I think for today's lecture, I think I would take this as an home message for me. See the patient the moment he walks inside. And the only problem is if the patient is in full hijab, that becomes a problem, to see the posture of, the spine posture. Okay, the next question is by Dr. Asim. He asks, are the incidence of oral pain increases after using earphones?
I think there are studies on this. I think some studies are there which says that it increases. The longer use of the earphones causes not oral pain as such. It could be more of referred pain. I think I've just seen some articles on this. I think most probably next time I can just.
Anything you want to highlight on this, Aisha? Have you come across any articles or anything on this? Oral pain increases after using. Definitely, bad earphones, high volume will make you deaf. That is for sure.
That's
But
exactly. I haven't come across any. It could be referred thing, but I haven't come across this. I'll have to check. I don't know come across this.
yeah, he also mentions Wong-Baker phases scale is used in pediatric age group. I think he is telling that out. He's not asking. I think he's telling that Wong-Baker phases scale. Okay. Okay. Can you, if you could just give a small glimpse on this, can you just tell us what is this Wong-Baker scale? Any idea on this phases scale? Any idea on this?
Yeah. It is usually having phases which is being rated. It is having a scale from 0 to 10. So it will have different expressions. Faces will have this smileys like a different expression. So the 0, 1 will be like 0 is an even number, 0 to 10. So 0, 1 will be a happy face. It's be written there, happy face. So when it comes to extreme one, it's a cry face. So depending on that, I think kids can rate it, like what face they can see.
Yeah, right, fine. And I think Dr. Naya Fidos beautifully he explains, few of the pain scales. I'll just read it out for the sake of information for the other clinicians here. He says pain scales are very relative in terms of which one prefers. There are at least one different pain scale. Most of the scales fall under either numerical rating, visual analog scale, categorical scales, 10 different scales for pain management. I think he just briefly has just given a small glimpse on the scale management. Okay, the next question is by Dr. Gausia. She asks, how do you assess pains in CIPA patients? I don't know the full form of CIPA patients. If someone could help me, yeah. She comes across. She says congenital insensitivity to pain and anhidrosis. I mean, that is what she says. I would repeat, CIPA patient, CIPA stands for congenital insensitivity to pain and anhidrosis. So how do you assess pain in these patients?
Shall I unmute Dr. Gausia so she
that would be great actually, because I'm puzzled with this terminology and I'm hearing it for the first time. I would love to hear from Dr. Gausia.
Dr. Gausia, you're unmuted, please. You can join the discussion.
Yes, ma'am, or Dr. Aisha, could you just tell me how do you assess these patients who are suffering from insensitivity to pain? You would go with organic, or how is it? Like, I'm just curious to know. Since you're talking about pain is when I got this doubt, because I feel somewhere feeling pain is also a part of, it is a boon, in fact. So I would want to know if in case you come across a patient with CIPA or congenital insensitivity to pain, how would you differentially diagnose? Do you even come across this kind of differential? Or would you think? I mean, we can always discuss this in GDP House.
Actually, as of now, I haven't come across this. To be frank, I haven't come across this term. As Dr. Nadeem told me, so I have no clue on this, to be frank.
Probably you can get back to us on GTP if you.
Yeah, sure. I can get back to you.
Dr. Gausia, madam, just for the sake of understanding and learning, particularly me, because I've always been a learner for these kind of abbreviations. Can you just tell us what exactly is congenital insensitivity to pain and anhidrosis for the sake of learning?
Well, this is a genetic disorder. It's been discussed in the groups, I think, almost twice or thrice. So we'll revisit it again, inshallah. And I would like Madam and Aisha to speak on this.
Right, fine. Thank you.
If I don't, sorry, if I could interrupt, I had a patient with this disorder in my practice. This was about, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay.
But I had to refer him because he was already diagnosed with this issue. I had to refer him to the hospital for a simple reason. I was taken aback when he said, I don't need the anesthetic. Don't use anesthetic on me for any treatment. So I decided not to treat him and refer him.
I think we'll be lucky to have such patients.
It is very rare. It is extremely rare, but as Dr. Gausia pointed out, again, it is purely subjective. Pain as such is purely subjective. So, you know, if I come in and say, as Nadeem was saying before, if I come in and say let's just say you numb a patient, I'm just giving you a case scenario. You just numb a patient to do an extraction. And you say, you roughly have a scale of 1 to 10 and say, listen, how numb do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10? Anybody who gives me, you know, let's say about 6 or 7, I proceed. And anybody who says goes below 5, I still think, you know, they will feel pain. But again, this is subjective. A lot of people use those nomenclatures just to identify for that specific individual. Anybody else, you go to somebody else. If Nadeem sees one of my patients, it'll be completely different, the way he goes about treating it.
Well, in fact, if I have to keep seeing those patients, I have to first explain him what is 1 and 2 and 3 up to 10. So
Yeah,
that would cause a lot of pain in my head. So I think before that, I would finish the extraction and send the patient home.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. Right. So I think Nair Firdaus, he says very easy to mistake SIPA for leprosy. I think we can take this discussion on to GDP because we are still very, I think we are quite novice about this condition. Okay, just asking regarding the pain management. Now the patient comes to you for pain and default, you have, Dr. Aisha, you have given numerous examples of different kinds of literatures, you know, causing pain. But end of the day, as a clinician, when we are not able to figure out what pain is this. So bottom line is phantom pain. And that is what we just say and we refer. And should we refer it to an oral medicine specialist, or should I refer it to a neurologist? Whom I should be referring this to for pain management?
Can I answer?
Anybody, yeah, anybody can take this question. Yeah, anybody.
Dr. Nadeem, if you are not able to identify the pain, actually, you know, usually patients, I have in my practice seen some ladies, they come to me, they say like they have pain. They just have pain. But when I thoroughly examine, I take the history, I don't get any specific etiology for that pain. For such patients, yeah, you can refer them to oral physician or neurologist if you cannot really identify. But there are certain pains we really, if you go to oral physician also, I think even those people will like, it is a psychological thing. It's not a order, it doesn't have any etiology. So such patients, you yourself can, in the clinic, you can consult them, give them a, like, you know, might be there now in Indian scenario is like, until you give a medicine, that this person is not a doctor. You have to give some medicine to that person. If you give a medicine, that person, that is a good doctor. I think that is Indian scenario, what people have in their mind. So if it is a atypical pain, you don't know the etiology, consult that patient, give them some multivitamins and all, which they can satisfy. And I'm sure they will come back to you saying that, yes, it is good. Rather than wasting their time referring to many doctors, other doctors, I think yourself, you can treat them. If you can really think that it is no etiology for that pain. I think so.
I think these patients with atypical facial pain, they are abused with multiple drugs, and I feel really sad for them. And particularly, honestly speaking, no criticism to any specialist. When you refer them to a neurologist, I think the first thing he starts with an antipsychotic drugs, and that is where I feel it's quite bad. They are in multiple drugs, and I think rather than, that's my personal way of seeing and what I have seen in my practice. When I have sent my patients to a neurologist, and when they have come back, they have come with a list of multiple drugs, and just not a simple drug. It's like antipsychotic drugs, and I don't know. You cannot cross question them. You know, why have you given them? Because we have referred them to the neurologist, and I think I have to take the responsibility of, you know, subjecting that patient to multiple use of drugs. As Dr. Amirun said, I think the patient needs a lot of counseling before we send them back. That is, until we have not diagnosed or we are not able to figure out pain, I think this is where the counseling comes. I think counseling itself is a different subject and a different topic to be spoken probably. Yeah. Dr. Aisha, any add-ons? I think Dr. Amirunsa has, mashallah, spotted on very nicely. Any add-ons to this?
Yes, sir, that's right. That would be definitely right. Whatever ma'am told is definitely right.
Yeah, fine. Dr. Firdaus asks, how would you differentiate between BMS, the burning mouth syndrome, and orofacial pain? Because both the etiology is vague and no clear understanding is there between both of them. So how do you differentiate them?
So firstly, if it's burning mouth syndrome, additive would be first a proper clinical history of the patient, then going for the complete blood count and zinc deficiencies, iron deficiencies, because even iron deficiency also might cause sometimes a burning sensation. So probably all the blood tests also would be one of the thing to differentiate from the orofacial pain, because orofacial pain sometimes might not have any the disturbances in the normal blood count. So going for complete blood test would be one of the reasons to differentiate, and the proper history also might help in some differential type.
So you mean to say the blood picture gives you the clear understanding between these two?
Yes, on some extent, yes, it does.
So how good are we dentists to take a call seeing the blood picture? No, do we need an add-on support from the clinician, from the attending physician, or we need an hematologist support? Or yeah, Dr.
For
Amir?
BMS, no, like burning mouth syndrome, it might be due to other systemic diseases also. Even in a diabetic condition or an anemic patient also, you have a burning mouth. So it is like, as Aisha said, it is good to have a blood picture. So we are going to get at least some systemic, if the patient has some systemic disorders also. So I think if you can, the most times as I have attended in many conferences, they say dentists are the person who can diagnose systemic diseases also at the first hand. So with the blood picture, if you are able to diagnose some systemic disease and refer them to the other clinicians, it's good. BMS and orofacial pain, as Nair Firdaus said, because their etiology is vague and not clear understanding. BMS as such, the definition itself says that there is no etiology. You are not able to diagnose any etiology. What is the etiology? If you're not able to diagnose what is the reason for that burning, then it is said to be a burning mouth syndrome.
Okay, keeping the systemic conditions away in the blood picture, but what exactly are we looking into the blood picture? Is the question asked by Dr. Nair. What exactly are we looking into the blood? You mean to say the iron profile, that is what you're talking about?
Yeah, iron profile will be more important in burning mouth syndrome, because most common cause for burning mouth syndrome is anemic conditions. And candidiasis as such, you can see other conditions like candidiasis and all, there you can see the lesions in the mouth. So that cannot be considered as a BMS. So BMS more commonly, I think, systemically anemic conditions. Anything
See,
else?
do you see BMS in young adolescent kids?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah?
No.
I don't think.
Okay, because I'll just tell you a case scenario. I had a patient just before the lockdown. She was, just due for exams. She was around 16, 17 years. She was totally healthy. Her chief complaint is severe burning sensation in the mouth. I was thinking, she's got some multiple ulcers, aphthous ulcers, check for ulcers, no ulcers. Her complaint is just burning mouth every time, 24/7. So I did ask her to meet her clinician for further investigation, or I did ask her regarding her, her general health, and get in touch with her gynecologist or whoever it is and come back to me, but she never came back. So that's the reason I was asking this. Do you see these conditions in that kind of age group, or?
More commonly in the menopause ladies who has hormonal disturbances, like as you said, in young girls, most probably hormonal disturbances. So it's good to refer them back to gynecologists.
Yeah, but unfortunately they didn't come. I think lockdown started. I think they didn't come. I think the next question is, so should we not be looking for hormonal disturbances? I think Dr. Nair, the answer was, the question answer is just explained. we should be looking, and we should be referring them to the concerned clinicians. Just for the sake of discussion, the blood picture, what you're talking, you said zinc evaluation, Dr. Aisha.
Yes, sir.
Okay, what exactly are we looking in zinc evaluation here?
So because zinc evaluation usually also has directly has an effect on all the hormones, like it has an effect on the immune system. So
Right.
it's also one of the things wherein the immune system is being maintained because the zinc levels are usually present. So when
Right.
this is also helping in the immune system, yes, it is like any taste disturbances or smell disturbances. Yes, it will definitely help in handling zinc to rule out if any taste or sense like smell disturbances be present. So zinc could definitely be one of the factors to just rule out the immune functions or dysfunction.
Right, right. And how often have you seen cases of trigeminal neuralgia at your practices? Both you and Dr. Amirunisa, how often have you come across?
So this cases I had come across in my PG days, like when I was doing my post-graduation days. We had cases, about 2 to 3 cases until I finished my assessment. So depending on whatever the history, but we did not give the treatment because we had to refer back the patient to the neurologist. But yes, we had the patient for the post-complete treatment. We had checked the patient again, but very rare cases. But if we had to refer the patient to neurologist.
I have seen cases since I am working in a rural area. I have trigeminal neuralgia per, I think every 3 or 4 months, I do see cases. There are a lot of cases in trigeminal neuralgia, but it has been misdiagnosed by the medical doctors. They refer it to me, then I have to refer them back to Bangalore to GDC to rule out things like what is the etiology of it to oral surgeons and all. There are many.
Do you treat them at your practice, madam?
Yeah,
Trigeminal
I
neuralgia?
start off with carbamazepine. And
Okay.
what is the problem with my patient is like once I start off with carbamazepine, they are happy with it because the pain reduces. They don't go for further evaluation.
Okay.
So
You have a follow-up of what? Once a
they come.
fortnight, once a month, or?
No, they don't come also. They don't come. The follow-up is very bad in my area, my side of
Okay.
practice. The follow-up
Okay.
is very bad. But it is very like I start off with a small doses like 200 mg of carbamazepine twice daily if it is very severe, or once daily. Then I ask them to come back to me because but they don't turn back. That's a very big problem with that. But
Yeah, I think follow-ups would really give you a good picture where they stand after the treatment. Unfortunately, most of us lack follow-up. Patients don't come back and give us their reviews. I think any more questions? I don't think we have more questions on board.
If I could just request
Yeah.
with regards to going back to management, I think Nadeem mentioned about antipsychotics. Now, carbamazepine is also an antipsychotic we use. So I think the first line of drugs which are recommended for such neuralgias are antipsychotics. There is a reason. That's because it's the way they act in reducing the nerve pain and the muscle pain. I'm not going into the physiology of it, but that's how they deal with it. If you could just give us some drugs which you both of you, Aisha and Dr. Amirunisa, usually prefer in scenarios of trigeminal. You just spoke about trigeminal neuralgia. The other situations where you've got atypical facial pain, or even for that matter, burning mouth syndrome. How do you actually manage these kind of situations in your practice?
Burning mouth syndrome, I have one lady who regularly comes to me, an old lady. She doesn't have any lesions in her mouth. Her blood picture is normal. She's around 60 years. She regularly comes to me. So I have just put her on multivitamins, nothing else. And she says she has a less salivation, and because of the less salivation, she's having burning mouth. So the early treatment what I had given was candidiasis and iron tablets and all. But now she comes regular to me saying with burning mouth, she has burning mouth. So I just put her on multivitamins, nothing else I have given her.
So it's like a placebo effect, if I'm not wrong.
Just placebo.
So has these drugs you've prescribed, has it shown any sort of improvement? Because you said that she reckons it's because of xerostomia or dry mouth.
No. It doesn't affect only. I have given her candidiasis. At one point, I have given even her oral topical steroids also. It has not affected her only. So at last I decided it's more of psychological pain what she's having. She's psychologically. Then I went into her deep into her history, family history and all. She was a parent who was left alone by children, and she's living alone in her house and in a village. So she had more of psychological problems. So whenever she comes, I counsel her, and she's happy with that counseling. So
Good.
she's become a regular patient for me. So every 2-3 months she comes. She's happy to talk to me, and with the multivitamins, she's happy. Now she's a bit better.
This again emphasizes a point that we need to go into deep history, and preferably try to take the patient into confidence and speak to them about their, social life. And
Yeah.
I think that's the only way, I think, to treat such conditions is to have a holistic approach, and preferably take them into confidence. But that's very nice of you, Dr. Amir.
Thank you.
What about you, Aisha? How do you manage, people with BMS?
Usually as of now in the practice, I haven't come across any patients with BMS. But yes, when we were in college, we used to give some of saliva supplements along, like as ma'am had mentioned, we give multivitamins. We used to give some of saliva supplements to the patients. So at least we increase the salivation rather than like only because the patient will definitely have decreased salivation. So we used to give some of saliva supplements, but that would be very less. The improvement would be very less, but no as such treatment for the body moisture, except like a placebo effect.
It's more a placebo, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's more of a placebo. Everything we treat, it's more of a placebo because.
Right. Because it's more of an psychological problem or psychological defect. So it's only like a placebo.
Antipsychotics plus the placebo of all these things, and we're hoping that it helps and it cures the patient.
It has some effect and some improvement there.
Okay. Thank you.
What Silogox do you prefer, Dr. Aisha? What exactly do you prefer?
So there's one mouthwash, saliva mouthwash, and also another lozenges which we usually get.
That was coming. Those mouthwashes were coming. I think for now those are stopped, if I'm not wrong, because I used to prescribe a lot once upon a time. Is it still available in the market?
It is not now, sir. It's not there. I think from past 6 months it's not available. But priorly it was there. Saliva mouthwash was priorly there. We used to give it in the clinic when the patients used to come.
Yeah.
Now it's not available. It's usually available only online. If any saliva substitutes are present, it's only usually available online.
I have a question to Dr. Amirun Issa. Since you prescribe carbamazepine or any kind of antipsychotic drugs, these drugs have it's like a double-edged sword. It cures that, but definitely it causes, it causes dry mouth also. But how do you counter that?
Sir, actually, I go along with a medical person.
Okay.
So I am not alone. I'm doing the treatment for this patients. So I will be in contact with the physician also. So we will be having a regular BP monitor and liver profile and all those things. So usually I refer them. If the cases are very severe, I do refer them to Bangalore GDC. I don't go for treatment myself.
Okay. The reason why I asked is the moment the patients are on antipsychotic drugs, I have seen, patients on even tryptamine and gabapentin, and this becomes, it's basically they abuse themselves. Even when the doctor or the clinician says them to stop, they get used to these kind of drugs, and that gives them that kind of a deja vu effect after taking. So have you come across these patients, with in spite of telling them to stop and they are still continuing? Basically, abusing themselves with these medicines?
Yeah, trigeminal neuralgia cases, neuralgic cases, not only trigeminal, neuralgic cases. I have seen patients who come who are like misusing this drugs. They go on using it. There's like, I am satisfied with this drug. I will be using it my whole life, whether it is there or not there. I come across those patients. So for such patients, we can't help but talk.
I had a patient, who was on, unfortunately, I had sent this patient to the neurologist. So the neurologist had put the patient on a tryptamine tablet. Amitriptyline is the content. So I think he's so used to that drug. He says, Dr. Saab, I'm so used to that. If I don't take that in the night and I don't sleep. So it's, I feel sad for him, but unfortunately, for you have to lose to gain something. Fine, we don't have enough questions. I think we are through with all the questions. Any more questions can be taken on to the GDP, inshallah. And not to forget, the SIPA would be discussed, inshallah, in detail by today or tomorrow.
We probably missed. I'll just put it across before we conclude. I think it was Dr. Basha, Asim Basha's question. Basically, he says in Bangalore, being a metro, you see different patients of various mother tongues, languages spoken. And well, this is his observation, purely his observation. He says Tamil speaking are more prone for oral pain. It's my observation. That's what he's mentioned. So do you have any views on that, or is it just purely his observation?
No, I think even I have to add on this, as I am more towards Telugu patients. Telugu patients are more stronger, so that if it is a small pain also, they will not come to me until the tooth is totally destroyed and they come with me with severe pain. So the tolerance of the person, I think geographical places, the tolerance is, you can say the difference tolerance. Like Tamilians, like Tamil Nadu people are more tolerant to the pain, and Andhra people are more better tolerant to the pain in Tamil patient than Tamil patients. I think
So I'd put it across as it's purely his observation. More so, he can provide some probably some review papers on those kind of stuff. Anyway, well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate Aisha giving us a wonderful presentation, and Dr. Amir Nisa to take your time out of a busy schedule, Sunday schedule, to be honest, to come and give us your views and answers, and Dr. Nadeem for putting across and being a good moderator. Jazakallah khair. And anybody who has any questions, please follow it up. I will be posting the video later on today on YouTube channel. So if you guys have missed it, please feel free to watch it there. Thank you all. Jazakallah khair. I'm going to end the meeting now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Jazakallah. Thank you.
Jazakallah.